Welcome to TYT Interviews. This time around, we are doing something unique. We're going to actually do a series on national security and civil liberties. What is this? All right, what it is something that I think is going to be great. And our first great guest is a terrific person to start with on this, Ray McGovern. Ray was with the CIA for 27 years. He's been one of the most vocal activists against the abuses of our civil liberties since then. Did some heroic actions in regard to that. Back when he was at the CIA, he chaired the National Intelligence Estimates, he prepared the President's daily brief, and he won some prestigious awards which he gave back because of the abuses of the CIA. He's now speaking out in favor of people like Chelsea Manning, Julian Assange, and Edward Snowden. Ray, great to have you on the Young Turks.
Thank you, Jay.
What was the award that you gave back?
It was a Distinguished Service Award based on my career of 27 years, and it was awarded at my retirement ceremony, at which the President, George H.W. Bush at the time, wrote a very nice letter commending the service that I provided to him as a briefer. And I gave it back because the CIA was openly identified in the person of Porter Goss, who was then the director, going down to John McCain's office at the Senate saying, look, you got to make an exception for CIA officers. We have to be able to do these enhanced interrogation techniques still. And so this bill that prohibits the military from doing it, make an exception for us. I said to myself, wow, wow. Do I want to be a part of this kind of thing, even by extension? And I said, no. So I took my medal and I brought it to Pete Hoekstra's office in the House. He was chair of the House Intelligence Committee at the time. And I gave it back saying, I don't want to be associated, however remotely, with an agency that is engaged in torture and still bragging about it.
So it's interesting. You have a background that people today wouldn't necessarily associate with progressives, although I think it is. You have a certificate in theological studies from Georgetown University. You have a business degree from Harvard, and then you worked at the CIA for 27 years. What is it that then separates you from the current CIA? I mean, and I guess part of that question has to be, was it different back in the day? Was it a better CIA?
Well, Jake, it's sort of a complicated situation here that people need to understand. There are two CIAs. The one that Truman intended, and that's the one I worked in, and the one that he didn't intend, and that he railed against, that he published an op-ed against in the Washington Post saying, what has happened to my CIA? I never intended the CIA to get involved in overthrowing governments or cloak and dagger activity. And interestingly enough, he wrote that op-ed and timed it to appear exactly 1 month after John Kennedy was killed. Okay, so Truman never intended this. It was an accident of history. What he wanted was an analysis shop, which would be in possession of all the information on a given issue or country, so that there would never be a Pearl Harbor where there were little snippets of information all around the intelligence community, the FBI, the embassy, and the code breakers. There was no one inbox, and the younger people have trouble with the concept that these inboxes were made out of wood in those days. Okay, into one inbox, if all that information came from the Navy and the Army Air Corps and the FBI and the code breakers, it would have been a no-brainer. There would have been no surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. So that was the first and foremost in Truman's mind. Secondly, he wanted an agency responsive to him, not under the Pentagon, which was always saying the Russians were 12 feet tall, not under the State Department, which was always just defending its policies, of course, but responsive only to him, so that they could come, and so that he could go, for example, and have his secretary call the director of Central Intelligence out in the woods of Langley, Virginia, and say, look, Mr. Director, The president wants you and your three topmost experts on Vietnam in his office at 2:30 this afternoon. He has an important meeting with the president, and LBJ is going to be asking some really tough questions. And I know what they are. I want the answers. And make sure they're the best, the three best of those two universities worth of specialists you have out there in Langley, Virginia. And that would happen, okay? And the president would get unfettered advice from the director, because we would tell him our opinion, and unless he disagreed with it, and we had it out with him, he would tell the president, as he did in this case, no, Mr. President, what those blue-suited generals are telling you about these big B-52s, and they're going to seal off the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Mr. President, you have to know, number one, the Ho Chi Minh Trail doesn't look anything like I-95 or I-66. It's like 134 trails in the jungle that you can't even see from the air, okay? And number two, we know Ho Chi Minh, he's not going to give up under bombing. Nobody ever gives up under only bombing. So it's going to require up to 1 million people to win this war, and even then, it's a very chancy thing. So we told LBJ that, and of course, he had other political considerations. He didn't want to be the first U.S. president to lose a war, and so he worked with the blue-suited generals, and he became the first U.S. president to lose a war. So two things there. We told it to Truman, and we told it to LBJ, and we told it like it was. That was the ethos, okay? Presidents didn't have to accept our advice. They didn't accept the advice of people who knew what was the story on Iraq. Those were outside the intelligence agency, but that's another story. So that was the analytic shop where I worked. Now, by an accident of history, the overthrowers of government, the Office of Strategic Services during World War II in Europe and Asian front, very, very, very brave, very imaginative people. They came back and said, well, do you still need us? No. Question answered itself. The Russians had taken over Eastern Europe, were threatening Western Europe. KGB, Soviet secret police, was running all over them. Of course we need you. And then the question came up, well, where are we going to put these guys? And then some idiot, I have to say, Cenk, that I use the term advisedly, some idiot says, hey, well, we're doing this analysis shop for Truman, and they're going to have some secret stuff because they have to run spies and collect information not otherwise available. So let's put the operators, let's put the overthrows of government right in and make one big happy family, which was a structural fault from the beginning. And what do you get out of that? You get the overthrow of the regime, the overthrow of the duly elected government of Iran in 53, Guatemala 54. We're off and running. We're going to get Fidel Castro, and our president himself is a victim, in my view, of this kind of unfettered operational outlook.
So before we get to the present day and how the freedom of the press is affected and into Edward Snowden, et cetera, and the media, which is very important, I do want to touch upon a couple more things about the past. I'm curious, on a personal level, what made you want to join the CIA?
I majored in Russian in the late 50s, got out of college in 61, needed to do my 2 years of military service. I was commissioned in the Army. And then the Russians were a real threat. I mean, this was not a bogus thing. This was, there was Cuba, there was Berlin, there were real threats. And I wanted to, sounds corny now, I suppose, but when John Kennedy said, don't ask, what your country can do for you, but what you could do for your country, a lot of us came down, there are a lot of us still around here in Washington. That was what brought us down. And when you had a special gift or a special expertise, I used to teach Russian as well, and then it was a natural transition from Army, infantry, and intelligence to the CIA, where I was pleased to work for 27 years as an analyst, first in the Soviet Union, and then with wider responsibilities, including briefing the very top officials of the White House and elsewhere on national security affairs every other morning. So I was delighted to do that. Toward the end of my career, we're talking now the 80s, late 80s, analysis group started to be corrupted. That was by virtue of Bill Casey finding a Russian under every rock in Nicaragua, for example, and Bobby Gates, who incidentally worked for me when he was a young analyst, well, Robert M. Gates, now he's written a book. We need to call him by his full name. Well, Robert, he saw 3 Russians under every rock in Nicaragua, and so he became chief of analysis. And who did he bring up? Who did he promote? What I call malleable managers. That's the bad news, because the analyst part of the agency got corrupted, and that's why you had a totally fraudulent. Please, listeners, don't believe mistaken. It wasn't a mistaken intelligence and a mistaken intelligence estimate. It was a fraudulent one served up to justify what the president wanted to do against Iraq, the low point of the analysis, as well as the operational part of the agency. There is good news, though, Cenk, and I hope you'll give me time to tell you how proud I am of the analysts that remained and stayed true to our ethos of speaking truth to power.
So let's get to the Iraq War next, but first, before we do that, let me run now that we've been talking about the CIA, run my theory by you. I've talked to other former CIA analysts and agents. I've talked to Oliver Stone about this and several historians, and this is my own theory, but that basically, and it's, I think it's a fairly logical one, but you were there, that's why I want to ask you, is that the branch of the CIA you're talking about that overthrows governments, etc., that has unfortunately morphed into almost the whole CIA at this point, it doesn't work for the American people, that they largely work for corporate interests. So, if it's not that we got the oil of Iran after we overthrew their democratically elected government, corporate interests got that oil. They made money off of it. When we overthrew the quote-unquote banana republics, it was for the benefit of banana companies, not for the benefit of the American people. So one, am I roughly right about that? And two, how did that happen? How did corporate interests wind up taking control of one of the most powerful forces on earth?
Well, that's the $64 question, Cenk. It's not only the CIA, it's the U.S. military that was used in this fashion. Listen to what Smedley Butler said, the 2-time Medal of Honor winner, Marine General. He finally figured out that he's working for the corporations, United Fruit and the others in the Caribbean and elsewhere. So, long story short, the CIA does what the President of the United States wants it to do. I talked about the legislation which set up the CIA as an analysis group. One sentence was stuck in there, Cenk, and it said, "The Director of Central Intelligence shall perform such other functions and duties related to intelligence as the President shall from time to time direct." Now, end quote. Okay. Now, don't shy away from the word. That gives the President of the United States, assuming he has an unscrupulous Director of Central Intelligence, as he did in George Tenet, that gives the President the right to have his own personal Gestapo. Do not blanch before the word, because that's what it amounts to. Now, that has always been the case. I worked under 7 presidents, 9 directors of Central Intelligence. And by and large, the directors that I worked under were able to navigate this very, very treacherous sort of maelstrom in a way with some integrity, some not. But when George Bush came in, he threw the book out on this, and he had a malleable director. And by that time, and this goes back to the start, by that time, and we're talking 21 years after Bobby Gates came back to the CIA as head of analysis, by that time you had a bunch of malleable managers managing the analysis unit as well as the operational. And that's how George W. Bush and George Tenet were able to do what Tenet interpreted was his function. And that is, as he said, if the president wants to make war in Iraq, it's our job to serve up the evidence, such as it is. Manufacture it, forge it, whatever it takes, we'll do it. And those malleable managers, totally corrupted by then, takes 20 years to corrupt an institution. They did his bidding, and what emerged from that was the worst national intelligence estimate that the agency has ever done, Worst not because it was mistaken again, but because it was fraudulent. That was the low point. Now there's a high point, and I hope you'll let me get to that.
All right, so on that low point then, let's just touch on it for a second. So I think that almost everybody at this point will acknowledge that, of course, Iraq had no ties to 9/11. Even George W. Bush has acknowledged that. But conservatives to this day say, well, look, it was an honest mistake. And then, in fact, it's not just conservatives. I would say the great majority of the mainstream media says it's an honest mistake on the weapons of mass destruction. Everybody thought they had them. Oh, well, what can you do? How is that wrong?
Well, it's wrong because they profess to know that there were weapons of mass destruction there. Rumsfeld said famously, we know where they are. They're around Tikrit and Baghdad and east, west, north, and south of there. We know where they are. Well, that was a bald-faced lie, okay? And actually, I had the good fortune of catching him in that. So don't take McGovern's word for it. The Senate Intelligence Committee spent 5 years looking into this, okay? And they issued a nonpartisan report where Chuck Hagel and one of those senators from Maine signed on. And what it said, and Jay Rockefeller, who was the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee at the time, what he said was, the evidence, and this is a quote, the evidence adduced to justify the war in Iraq was, quote, uncorroborated, comma, contradicted, comma, or even non-existent, period, close quotes, okay? Oh, I ask you, Cenk, what does non-existent intelligence look like? Is it faith-based intelligence? No, it's forgeries. It's all manner of things that my erstwhile colleagues lowered themselves to do because they wanted to get ahead and they didn't care about the people that don't look like us in Iraq.
So now let's fast forward to today. You know, a lot of people, again, in the intelligence community say, how can you support Edward Snowden? This guy is a traitor. We're in the business of secrets, and he spilled our secrets. It's the biggest violation you could possibly have. Now, Ray, I know you disagree with that. I want to know why. But also, when you were at the CIA, you probably wouldn't have wanted the intelligence that you guys were preparing leaked to the public. So what's the difference here?
What Edward Snowden leaked to the public were gross violations of our rights under the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. This is serious stuff. There's only one oath that we as intelligence officers, or me first as an Army officer, and millions of Americans have sworn to, and that is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, period. Snowden took that seriously. What people don't know is that one of his colleagues out there in Honolulu said, you know, I really am upset about all this character assassination of Ed Snowden because I worked with him, you know, and I don't know if I really agree with what he did, but yeah, he was the best and the brightest. We went to him with all our problems, and you know, he had this Constitution on his desk, and it was all dog-eared, and he used to wave it out, and he used to argue with us. Is what we're doing consonant with this Fourth Amendment? And we all said, forget about it, Ed. Look how nice it is here. They're making six figures. Forget about it. Well, he wouldn't forget about it, okay? And that's what makes him a patriot, in my view. Not a hero or a coward or a traitor. And he's a patriot because he took his oath to preserve, to support, and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, seriously. And what he saw was the U.S. government creating the capability, what he called turnkey tyranny, to have all the data, all the information they would need if at a certain point they wanted to wrap all of us up that were considered to be sympathizers with terrorists or supporters or linked or just suspicious people like my Catholic worker friends, some of which have been arrested for protesting against war. So that's what was afoot here. And Snowden uniquely recognized not only how dangerous it was and what his duty was under his oath, but also he learned from the experience of Thomas Drake at NSA, Bradley Manning or Chelsea Manning, Julian Assange, that if he were to achieve his goal of informing the American people, there was no option. He had to get out of Dodge, right? And he did. And the first thing he said when he got to Hong Kong was, look, my major fear is that I will have sacrificed all this, risked my whole life for no effect. Well, now Ed Snowden is able to see, because he's connected with the internet like the rest of us, that his sacrifice has been for the good. And the president really, he really amuses me when he says, I was going to do this anyway. So like my tiny, like teenage kids, oh yeah, I was just about to do that. Give me a break. This would never have surfaced. These gross violations of our constitutional rights would never have surfaced unless one person, you call him eccentric? Well, excentron, the Greek words, yeah, he's a little bit out of the center, but that's a ping on the rest of us. There used to be the center, used to be, well, you take an oath, you respect it. Now it's regarded as sort of something unusual. Be that as it may, we need unusual people like Ed Snowden.
But Ray, I understand we have a progressive president who's going to bring us change from the Bush administration. So I'm sure that he'll be supportive of Edward Snowden at some point, right?
Cenk, I have real problems with the president. I don't know what he believes. I don't know what he stands for. I've checked with the doctors at George Washington University Hospital. They're 5 years away still from a backbone implant, so there's no hope for that solution. I think, all kidding aside, that our president is afraid of the security services. Why else would he refuse to pursue people who openly tortured other people, people who put people in black prisons without telling their wives or their children, much less the Red Cross, people who eavesdropped against the Fourth Amendment, grossly against the Fourth Amendment? Why else would he say, well, no, I don't think I'd do that? Why else would he leave James Clapper, who lied through his teeth on March 12th of last year, saying, oh, no, the NSA doesn't collect any information of any kind on millions or tens of hundreds of millions of Americans? Well, that's a bald-faced lie. What did Obama do? He said, well, he should have been, this was Obama said, he should have been more careful. Well, hello, you don't leave a liar in. A liar under oath before the Senate, that's a felony, okay? A felony on many counts. You don't leave him in as head of the intelligence apparatus unless you're afraid of him. He's afraid of the likes of Clapper. He's afraid of the likes of John Brennan. He thought if he put Brennan into the CIA, what happened to him, Obama, or what happened to Kennedy would not happen to Obama. I'm not sure his trust in Brennan is well placed. And I think Obama thinks the same. So he's afraid of them. And that's a heck of a situation when you have the President of the United States afraid of his own security services.
Yeah. I have a simpler theory that he just doesn't care that much about policy at all. All he cares about is himself. He's a Class A politician. And so he thinks, I just want to get along here in Washington, whatever people want me to do, whatever will get me a pat on the back, whether it's the media, it's the National Security Organization, whether it's the Republicans. I don't really care as long as they say that I'm a good president and I have a good legacy and I can get reelected and all the things that Washington cares about. And he's just not if he is a progressive, it's just totally irrelevant to him. It's like 1% of his consideration. So
I'll agree with that.
Yeah, all right. So at least we have agreement on that, which is not, unfortunately, not.
I'll be right. Yeah, my friends say that I'm being too lenient on him, particularly when I say, well, there's a possibility that General Hayden of the NSA and the CIA earlier, General Alexander and Clapper are not telling the president the full story. And I say, well, that's not going easy on the president. Which is worse?
Yeah.
That he doesn't know what's going on, or that he does know what's going on and tolerates it? I don't know which is worse. What do you think, Cenk?
Well, the reality is that they're probably both a little true. So meaning that I remember when he was considering his Afghanistan policy, and he said, all right, give me a policy options where I put in more, I keep the same, or I withdraw the troops. And the generals came back, and they did not include an option that included withdrawing the troops. Like, I would have immediately stopped the meeting and said, look, you're going to come back next week and you're going to have that option. Otherwise, the guy below you is going to have that option because you're going to be fired, right? But that's not who.
Well, he did say, well, Secretary Gates, you promised me that kind of option. Where is it? And Bobby Gates said, we'll give you maybe that in a couple of weeks, which he never did. So, I'm not saying that he's got more guts than you think he has. All I'm saying is that, it was so patently fixed that he had to do this for political reasons. And count the guys that have died because of that. Not only Americans, but others, okay? Count the people who die in surges that are totally unnecessary. Look where Afghanistan is now. And this business about we're going to surge 30,000, but then we have a deadline, we're going to pull them out. That makes no strategic sense at all. I mean, you don't have to be a progressive or a conservative. My 4-year-old could figure out that you don't achieve your aims by saying you're going to surge for a year or so and then you're going to pull them off. You can't do that. It never works, particularly in a situation like Afghanistan.
What's funny is that I've now talked to the entire political spectrum, and that's the one thing you all have an agreement on, from Raymond McGovern all the way to General Petraeus. Everyone agrees that strategy made no sense whatsoever.
That may be the only thing I agree with Petraeus on.
That's true. All right, so now I want to move on to the media, because it's one thing for the establishment to want to protect itself, and for the people that are abusing the Fourth Amendment at the NSA, CIA, et cetera, to want to protect themselves, and for the president to support them. They work under him, and we just talked about the president's motivations. But the media is supposed to be the watchdogs against the government. But it often appears, especially before the Iraq War and even today, that they tend to side with the government far more than they do with people saying, hey, wait a minute, maybe Iraq does not have a connection to 9/11, which, by the way, at the time of the beginning of the war was perfectly obvious. And parts of the media had covered it in terms of, like, the New York Times covered it on page 827, et cetera. And now, instead of supporting the Snowdens and Assanges, they seem to oftentimes ridicule them and cast them as outsiders and let government talking points run roughshod on their airwaves. So, one, am I seeing that right? And two, what do you think their motivation is for that?
Well, number one, Cenk, I've been here in Washington 50 years now. I've seen a lot of change. But there's one change that dwarfs all the others in significance, and that is that we no longer have, in any real sense, a free media. The Fourth Estate is dead. We need to recognize this. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is there's a Fifth Estate, okay? It's in the ether somewhere. All I know is it comes down into my computer, okay? And I can get the news. That's the good news, okay? But the Fourth Estate, write them off. Don't pretend you can get information for the Fourth Estate. I start my day with Amy Goodman, and then I go online, and I get pretty well informed before I'm asked to do an interview in the afternoon, partly because I know my way around the net. Now, what's their motivation? Well, look at who owns the media. I mean, the mainstream media, so-called, is owned by the same corporations who are profiteering on wars. I don't say profiting, I say profiteering. Now, look at them, GE, Disney, the whole, look at their superstructure. Their idea is to keep these wars going, and the best way to do that, of course, is continued drone strikes and everything else to keep the lines before the recruiting stations for Al-Qaeda, keep them moving, keep them going, keep them populated. So, it's a really incestuous sort of thing. And Jefferson and Madison, they all spoke about the premier need for a free press. And when Jefferson was asked, if you had to make a choice between a government and a free press, in those days, newspapers, of course, Jefferson said, no problem, free press every time. Without a free press, the government will become a tyranny. And we're close to that right now. The other thing I'll say is that when you have the corporate interests like this intertwined with the government and the security services and parts of the Congress and the media, I'm not supposed to say it on air, Cenk. It's the F word, but it's not what you're thinking, okay? It's fascism. That's the definition that Mussolini gave to fascism. And, Ed Snowden is quite right. It's a turnkey situation. They're ready to introduce this the next time the balloon goes up, and that's very, very dangerous.
All right, so let's end on possibly a hopeful note. Now, first of all, there are good groups fighting back against this now. Freedom of the Press Foundation is one of them. I know you're supportive of them. And then Snowden just joined that group as well. It's, you know, got a lot of the top names fighting back in favor of the press. Glenn Greenwald now starting an organization with Pierre Omidyar and Jeremy Scahill is part of that, Laura Poitras, some great, Dan Frumkin, a lot of people we've had on the show that I think are great fighters for truth and real watchdogs of the government. Let me ask you, though, in general, are you hopeful or are you more worried about the future?
I'm by nature an optimist. I think that the flaw here is to expect immediate success. This is a long-term proposition. And a lot of the heat will come from abroad. Exactly 1 week from now, I'll be speaking at the University of Glasgow in favor of the candidacy of Edward Snowden to be rector of the University of Glasgow in Scotland, okay? The Europeans are in high dudgeon, and with good reason. You know, our Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs can use foul language in dismissing the EU, but they're here to stay, and foul language is not going to get the United States anything other than more derision. So there's going to be pressure from Europe. Now, what I've appealed to the Europeans to do, I've said, look, it's your turn. My father's generation fought to expel fascism from Europe. Now it's your turn. You know what it's like. We don't know what it's like, but you do, okay? And what you need to do is tell us what lists are like. I was in Amsterdam in August, talked to a Dutch friend. He said, you know, when the Nazis came in to the Netherlands, all these little towns and dwarfs and cities, they had lists of citizens, okay? One column, religion. One column, race, okay? Now, the progressive ones, the ones that had guts, set fire to those lists before the Nazis came in. The other ones who wanted to curry favor with, you know, want to stay and be as the town councilor and all, they gave the lists immediately to the Nazis. Guess what happened? Those Jews that lived in those localities got shipped off on the next freight car to Auschwitz, okay? The Nazis had great difficulty finding the Jewish people that lived in the areas where there were no lists, and that's what lists can do. And we're talking about electronic lists now that are incredibly more efficient. That's what lists can do. And for Dianne Feinstein to say, I don't care if you know, my Google and my information is, for her to say that when just 50 years ago or more, she would have been among those people wrapped up immediately if the mayor of her town kept those lists. That just betrays a lack of historical knowledge, which I hope that our European friends can finally rise up and say, look, you know, we'll put up with enough of you Americans telling us about liberty and freedom. This is what we experienced 1 generation ago, or 2, I guess, and this is what you need to do. You need to be aware of the what I call the creeping fascism that seems to be afoot in your country, and just look no longer than the head of the House Intelligence Committee, who's doing Joe McCarthy on steroids. It's really quite amazing how he's coming out against accomplices, read journalists, accomplices who are trading in stolen material. It's really frightening.
All right. Well, I like your idea of bringing Edward Snowden to Scotland, the home of William Wallace. Maybe you'll start every lecture with freedom, and we hope that he stays free. Ray McGovern with the CIA for 27 years, tremendous activist for our civil liberties, our rights, our constitutional freedoms. Thank you so much for joining us on the Young Turks.
You're most welcome.